this point, our user can enter their credentials into our authentication form. When we define some of the business logic for our state, we define an enum password requirements. And within our state class, we also define a list of these requirements, allowing us to enforce certain requirements for the password that has been entered. To recap, these requirements were requiring a capital letter, requiring a number, and requiring at least 8 characters. So while we have these requirements defined, we need to let the user know about them. So now we're going to create a composable that displays the requirements during sign-up, making the requirements visual so the user knows when they have been satisfied. We're going to start here by creating a new composable called requirement. This will represent an individual requirement along with the message and whether it's satisfied or not. This is going to be the child composable or the overall requirements composable. This is going to take a modifier, again with a default modifier value, the message that's going to be displayed for that requirement, and whether or not it's satisfied. We're going to create a quick preview so that we can see a visual representation of this as we are building out the composable. With these arguments in place, we can start to build out the content of our composable. Here, we'll start by adding a row composable so that we can add the children horizontally next to one another, along with adding some modifiers to customize the behavior and display of content. We'll chain from the modifier that is passed into the composable function using the padding modifier to add some padding to our composable. We'll also use the vertical alignment argument to align the children in the vertical center. Because we're showing an icon with a text label to the side of it, we want these to be aligned on the y-axis, which can be achieved via the use of alignment center vertically. We'll now go ahead and add an icon composable, which will be used to show a check icon using the check icon from the default icons package. We'll use a size modifier to fix this to a size of 12dp, along with setting null as the content description. While we will be using this to signify the current status of the requirement, we're going to focus on the accessibility of this component after the foundations are in place. With our icon now in place, let's add a label that will describe what the requirement is. For this, we'll be using the text composable and assign the message from the arguments of the composable function. We can now see in our preview what this looks like. Things are a little cramped, so we're going to add some visual spacing here using the spacer composable, giving it a fixed width of 8dp. This creates some nice spacing between our icon and text. We'll also update our preview to have a background so that things are a bit more visible within the IDE. Currently, we have this satisfied flag within our composable, but we're not actually doing anything with it. We're going to utilize this here to visually represent the status of the requirement, which we'll do by using a color for the icon and text based on whether the requirement is satisfied. Here, we'll use the theme of our application to create a color reference. We use the primary color here in our satisfied scenario, as this will stand out to the user during the authentication process. For the case where the parser does not meet the requirements, we'll copy the on-surface color from our theme, modifying the alpha value so the color appears slightly faded within our UI. Using this color reference, we can then apply this to the icon using the tint argument, along with applying this to the label using the color argument on the text composable. With this in place, we now have a composable that will display a requirement along with theming to allow it to represent the current state of the satisfied flag. While we have this composable function in place to compose a requirement, we can improve things here when it comes to accessibility. Currently, the label of the requirement will be red, but we are relying on a color representation to signify whether the requirement is satisfied or not. This isn't very accessible, so we'll apply some modifications to improve things here. What we'll do is add a description to the requirement so that when the accessibility service is describing the element, it can be described whether or not the requirement is currently satisfied. We'll start here by adding 2 new string resources to our resources file, one for the requirement being satisfied and one for it still being needed. We use the %s as a placeholder for a string that we will be replacing. This will be the label for the requirement. This means that the accessibility services will describe this as at least 8 characters satisfied or at least 8 characters needed. Within our requirement composable, we can now build our description by accessing this resource via the use of the string resource composable function. You'll notice here that we pass the message argument from our composable function as an argument to the string resource function. This is because we are using the %s placeholder, so any arguments that are provided here will be used as the replacement. With this in place, we can now go ahead and apply the semantics modifier to our row composable. When doing this, we'll want to set the merge the sentence flag as true, as we don't need the child composables to be described individually, along with setting the text semantics as the requirement status that we generated. Because we're now setting the semantics for our row and merging the content of the container, we can go ahead and clear the semantics on the child text composable using the clear and set semantics modifier to do so. This will avoid any descriptions of being duplicated with the semantics tree. With this in place, we now have a composable function to represent an individual requirement with improved accessibility support.